My beloved ones, there are nights when silence speaks louder than thunder, when the air itself trembles with the weight of unspoken truths. The night I now bring before your spirit was such a night of whispers, a night where shadows met revelation, and where hearts burdened with hidden deeds stood beneath the gaze of divine justice. It was not a night of punishment, but of unveiling, for what is hidden must eventually rise to the light, and every secret must one day breathe in truth's embrace. 3 souls gathered beneath that moonlit sky, their voices hushed, their spirits uneasy. They spoke not of trivial things but of a child, a name that carried more power than they could understand. This child, pure of heart and radiant in destiny, was the quiet center around which unseen forces moved. Each syllable spoken that night rippled through realms beyond their knowing, awakening currents of justice and mercy that neither fear nor deceit could restrain. Beloved ones, understand that there are moments woven into time when divine order interrupts the course of human secrecy. Such moments do not occur by chance. They are the meeting of justice and mercy, the convergence of heaven's patience with earth's truth. The night of whispers was one such threshold. What began as a conversation among mortals became a summons of spirit, a revelation that none who were present would ever forget. When the woman trembled, when her tears fell and her voice quavered with confession, it was not simply emotion that overtook her. It was the soul's reckoning. The truth, long buried within her, demanded to be heard. The man who fled did not merely vanish into darkness. He ran from the reflection of his own choices, yet even flight cannot escape the pull of divine reckoning. And the relative who fainted, falling between fear and awe, touched for a brief instant the reality of the unseen, the moment where heaven brushes the mortal heart and calls it to awaken. You see, beloved, in every gathering where truth is called forth, the divine is present, not as judge alone, but as witness and liberator. For truth is not cruelty, it is cleansing. It is the sacred fire that burns away illusion, revealing both shadow and light in their rightful balance. That night was not designed to destroy, but to awaken. Each heart that trembled beneath the weight of the child's name felt the vibration of justice not as punishment, but as transformation. And the child, oh beloved ones, the child was not there in body, but their spirit moved like a quiet flame through the air. The mention of their name shifted the energy within the room, for the divine often rests within innocence, and innocence, when wronged, calls forth the highest protection. Even without speaking, the child's essence became the catalyst of truth, unraveling the lies that had been spun against them and summoning revelation into being. This tale, my beloved ones, is not a story of accusation, but of illumination. It is the chronicle of how hidden words awaken consequence, how divine justice weaves its threads unseen until the moment of unveiling. Through this story, I will guide you to see not only the actions of the night, but the spiritual architecture beneath it, the lessons of conscience, protection, forgiveness, and awakening that arise when heaven whispers through human hearts. Listen closely as I unfold each part. For within every tremor, every tear, every silence, there lies a message for your own spirit. The night of whispers is more than a tale. It is a mirror. It reflects the truth that cannot remain buried, the protection that surrounds the pure of heart, and the divine justice that restores balance when falsehood has gone too long unchallenged. So, beloved, let us walk together into that night, not in fear, but in understanding. Let us witness what transpires when words meet their consequence, when hearts meet their truth, and when heaven itself bends low to restore the order of light. For the story that begins in trembling ends in transformation, and every whisper heard beneath the stars becomes, in time, a voice of redemption. My beloved ones, the night unfolded quietly, as if the world itself were holding its breath. A thin veil of mist drifted across the sky, softening the moon's glow until it seemed a single lantern burning over a sacred meeting. 3 souls sat together, drawn by something greater than intention. A subtle pull, the kind that arises when truth is ready to speak. None of them yet understood that the very air around them was alive with expectation, that heaven and earth were poised to listen. At first their voices were ordinary. Polite phrases, careful tones, words chosen to keep the peace. Yet beneath the conversation lay a restless current. It trembled in the woman's hands as she folded and unfolded her scarf. It tightened in the man's throat each time the child's name hovered near his lips. And in the relative's gaze flickered a knowing that she dared not articulate. They had gathered for discussion, yet what awaited them was confession. The child of whom they spoke was far away, perhaps sleeping, unaware that their name had become the axis upon which so many hearts would turn. That name, innocent, luminous, carried an unseen resonance. When it was uttered, the candle on the table wavered, and a stillness fell so deep that even the night insects paused their song. The woman's eyes filled with tears before she understood why. It was as though the sound of the name itself demanded honesty, peeling away the layers of pretense. Beloved ones, truth often arrives not as thunder but as a trembling whisper. It does not need force to be powerful. It simply waits for the moment when silence can no longer bear its weight. The woman's heart, long burdened by hidden knowledge, began to break open. Words formed, halting and fragile, carrying with them years of concealment. She spoke of choices made in fear, of secrets held to protect herself, of a guilt that had shadowed her every joy. Her confession filled the room like the slow rising of dawn, painful, inevitable, yet filled with light. The man tried to steady her with reason, to remind her that the past could not be undone. But even as he spoke, his composure crumbled. The mask he had worn for years, a mask of authority and calm, slipped away, revealing a heart no less afraid. He looked toward the window as though seeking escape, yet there was nowhere to flee. For when truth awakens, flight offers no refuge. It follows, patient and certain, until acknowledgement is complete. The relative, caught between disbelief and revelation, felt her body tremble. A dizziness swept through her as the words filled the room. It was not mere faintness. It was the body's surrender to the magnitude of unseen realities. In her brief collapse, she glimpsed something vast and compassionate. A field of light surrounding the child, a protection so immense that no malice could approach it. When she regained her senses, her eyes shone with quiet awe. Beloved, such moments are sacred crossings. The human heart, when confronted with its own shadow, stands on the threshold between despair and redemption. The woman's tears were not weakness but purification. The man's silence was the beginning of humility. The relative's awakening was the first breath of understanding that there are forces beyond judgment, forces that guide, correct, and heal. Outside, the wind rose gently, carrying away the stale air of secrecy. Within, the three souls sat in the aftermath of honesty, bewildered, relieved, and afraid. Yet already, unseen, the currents of divine mercy were moving. For every truth spoken in sincerity calls forth assistance. Every act of courage stirs protection into motion. The night was no longer heavy but expectant, as though creation itself awaited their next breath. My beloved ones, remember this: every gathering where truth is invited becomes a temple. It matters not if the walls are of stone or silence. What sanctifies the space is the intention to see clearly. The moment these three spoke the child's name with trembling hearts, the veil between the seen and unseen thinned, and grace entered quietly. Hold this lesson close. The first step toward liberation is acknowledgement. The woman's voice, though shaking, opened a doorway through which healing would soon pour. The man's departure would not erase his part in the story. It would only delay his encounter with redemption. The relative's fainting was not weakness, but the soul's way of absorbing a revelation too great for words. Thus began the Night of Whispers, not as a tale of condemnation, but as a sacred unfolding where human frailty met divine patience. From that hour forward, none of the three would remain as they had been. The truth had spoken, and its echo would follow them, through guilt, through awakening, through the long, merciful process of transformation. My beloved ones, after the trembling words fell into silence, the room seemed to breathe differently. A hush spread through the air, not empty but full, thick with the residue of things finally spoken. The candle's small flame bent low and then straightened again, as if bowing before the weight of what had been revealed. Truth had entered the space. It would not depart until it had finished its work. The woman sat motionless, her hands pressed to her chest as though trying to steady a heartbeat that had become a storm. Every tear that slid down her face carried fragments of the years she had hidden from herself. She had thought confession would destroy her, but now she felt the opposite. That secrecy had been the real destroyer, and release was the first breath of life. The man stood near the window, his back turned. In the glass he saw his own reflection dimmed by the night outside. His thoughts rushed like wind. What have we done? What will become of us? He had spent so long convincing himself that silence was protection, that to keep the truth buried was an act of mercy. Yet the woman's words had exposed the hollowness of that reasoning. He realized that his composure had been nothing more than fear dressed as control. The longer he looked into the glass, the less he recognized the face that stared back. The relative, newly awakened from faintness, watched them both with a stillness that felt ancient. Something within her had shifted. During the moment of collapse, she had sensed an immense gentleness, as if unseen arms had caught her and set her down again. That memory now burned softly in her heart, giving her courage to witness what unfolded. Though she spoke no word, her quiet presence steadied the others. It reminded them that mercy still lingered in the room. Beloved, when a soul releases what it has carried too long, the first sensation is often chaos. Old emotions surface, voices of fear rise, the body trembles under the newness of light. But do not mistake this turbulence for punishment. It is the sea inside being stirred so that the impurities may float away. The woman's sobs, the man's retreat, the relative's silence. All were necessary movements in the rhythm of healing. Outside, night deepened. Clouds moved across the moon, veiling and unveiling its light as though reflecting the uncertainty within the house. Each shift of brightness cast new shapes on the walls. First the silhouette of the woman bent in prayer, then the outline of the man pacing, then the faint image of the relative standing between them. Even these shadows seemed to participate in the confession, silent witnesses drawn by compassion. Slowly the woman's crying subsided. Her voice, hoarse yet steady, filled the quiet. I thought I could hide it, she said, but it has lived in me like a second heartbeat. Every joy has echoed against it. Her words were not accusation but acceptance, the beginning of repentance that asks for no audience but truth itself. The man turned at last. What will we do now? He asked, though the answer was already unfolding. He felt the presence of something larger than their fear, an invisible current urging him toward humility. For the first time in years he wanted not to control but to understand. The relative stepped closer, her eyes clear. We will listen, she whispered. There is more here than what we see. She could not explain how she knew, only that the moment had become sacred ground. Somewhere beyond their hearing, the unseen realm was shifting, not to condemn them, but to realign what had gone astray. My beloved ones, know this truth. When hearts open, heaven listens. No plea for forgiveness is lost in the air. It travels into the order of things, and grace responds in ways the mind cannot measure. The pain these three felt was not the end but the middle, the crucible in which honesty refines the soul. The woman's guilt would soften into wisdom. The man's fear would dissolve into understanding. The relative's awe would grow into guardianship. Through them all ran the silent memory of the child, the one whose name had awakened this night. Neither accusation nor resentment lived in that memory, only a quiet strength, as if the innocence of the child were sending ripples of forgiveness across time. The energy of that purity began to fill the room, unseen but unmistakable, urging the weary hearts toward reconciliation. Beloved, remember this when you face your own reckonings. Confession is not collapse. It is ascent. What feels like breaking is the sound of chains releasing. And though the night may seem endless, dawn always waits at its farthest edge. The very act of admitting truth sets light in motion, and that light travels ahead to prepare a path for healing. As the candle burned low, the woman lifted her eyes. She did not yet know how tomorrow would unfold, but she sensed that something invisible had shifted inside her, a thread connecting her heart to grace. The man, humbled, placed his hand upon the table, grounding himself in the present. The relative bowed her head in silent gratitude for the glimpse of mercy she had felt. Thus the night held them, not as captives of regret, but as students of transformation. My beloved ones, when honesty has cracked the shell of secrecy, the light that enters is not always gentle. It dazzles the eyes. It searches the corners where the heart once hid its fear. Yet that light is mercy itself, arriving to heal what pain has scattered. So it was on the night that followed the confession. The three souls, though weary, felt something stirring beyond them, a hush that was neither silence nor sound, but presence. The woman woke before dawn, the taste of salt still on her lips from her tears. The world outside was washed clean by dew. The first birds had not yet sung. She sensed that she was being invited to listen to something older than words. Within the quiet, she felt warmth gather near her chest, a slow pulse that matched her own heartbeat, yet was not of her making. She thought at first it was memory, but soon realized it was compassion. She whispered into the dim light, "If you are real, teach me how to begin again." The moment she spoke, a peace settled around her shoulders like a shawl. It did not erase her remorse, but steadied it, transforming regret into willingness. The man in another part of the town could not sleep. Shadows moved along his walls like reminders of everything he had postponed facing. He tried to read, then to pray, but every attempt felt hollow. Finally, he went outside barefoot into the cool grass. Above him the stars hung motionless, innumerable and patient. Their calm pierced him more deeply than any accusation. He understood then that truth had not come to punish him, but to return him to himself. The first tears he had shed in many years fell freely. In that surrender he felt a lifting, as though the weight of pretense that had long pressed on his chest was being quietly removed. The relative dreamed. In her vision she stood at the edge of a river whose water shimmered with light. On the opposite bank a child smiled, unafraid. Between them arched a bridge woven of sound, notes like wind chimes, delicate but strong. The child raised a hand, and the bridge brightened. She awoke with tears of relief, knowing the dream was no fantasy but a reminder. Innocence is never unguarded. Protection surrounds purity as naturally as breath surrounds life. Beloved, these were not miracles of spectacle but miracles of awareness. The divine rarely shouts. It leans close and whispers through conscience, through the ache that insists on truth, through the unexpected calm that follows surrender. What the three began to feel was not new grace descending from above, but the uncovering of grace that had always been with them. I tell you this so you may understand. Awakening is seldom sudden thunder. It is the slow softening of the heart until it can finally hear what was always being said. The woman's new tenderness, the man's humility, the relative's reverent quiet, each was a language through which mercy spoke. Throughout the day that followed, small coincidences wove themselves into their paths. The woman, walking through the market, met an old friend she had wronged years before. The friend greeted her with warmth, not resentment, and that simple kindness broke another chain within her. The man, in his workshop, found a child's drawing tucked in a forgotten book, a sketch of sunlight spilling over a hill. It reminded him of the one whose name had awakened the night, and he realized that innocence, once harmed, seeks not revenge but restoration. The relative, tending her garden, noticed how the rain fell evenly on weeds and roses alike. She smiled, understanding that grace is no respecter of hierarchy. It blesses wherever it can be received. Beloved, divine intervention is not always a flash of fire or a voice from the clouds. It is the rearrangement of ordinary hours so that understanding can arise. It is the sudden gentleness that visits a troubled mind, the strength to ask forgiveness when pride resists, the courage to keep walking toward light even when the path burns beneath your feet. In such ways, heaven works quietly, healing what human effort alone cannot. That evening, as twilight deepened, a soft rain began to fall. Each of them, the woman, the man, the relative, stepped outside and, without knowing why, lifted their faces to the sky. The droplets were cool, cleansing. None spoke, yet all felt the same assurance. The story had changed. The child's name, once the source of tension, had become a benediction. It was no longer a mirror of guilt, but a symbol of restoration. So, my beloved ones, learn from them. When remorse wakes you, let it teach rather than torment. When humility finds you, welcome it as a friend. For every soul that dares to face truth will find that light has been waiting just beyond the threshold. The same current of grace that touched those three on that quiet night moves even now through every heart willing to listen. My beloved ones, light once released does not remain still. It moves, seeking every corner where shadow has lingered. So it was after the quiet rain. The night of confession had ended, yet its echo began to work through the days that followed. The three who had spoken the child's name found themselves changed, though none could have explained how. It was as if their lives had been gently tilted and everything they had tried to keep hidden started to slide toward the open. The woman discovered that truth reshapes the ordinary. When she entered her kitchen the next morning, sunlight poured through the window in a way she had never noticed before. Each beam of light seemed to insist that she see clearly. As she moved through her tasks, memories surfaced. Small acts of omission, quiet justifications, the ways she had allowed fear to speak louder than love. They came not to accuse but to be released. She whispered apologies into the air, trusting that sincerity itself would carry them where they needed to go. With every whispered confession, the air grew lighter. The man, meanwhile, walked through his day with an unfamiliar humility. He greeted strangers, listened before answering, allowed silence where he once would have filled it. People around him sensed the difference. They spoke more gently in his presence, as though responding to an invisible harmony. Yet within him the work of truth continued. He saw now how his efforts to control had twisted the threads of many relationships, and he resolved to begin the slow labor of repair. He would not speak of redemption. He would live it one quiet act at a time. The relative, who had seen light in her dream, began to understand the balance between seeing and speaking. There are revelations, beloved, that must be lived before they can be told. She carried her new understanding carefully, tending it like a lamp. In conversations she listened more deeply. In moments of conflict she felt a calm that was not her own. The fainting of that earlier night had become a doorway. She had glimpsed what lies beyond fear, and she could not forget it. Soon the outward consequences began to appear. Old misunderstandings resurfaced seeking closure. Letters arrived, unexpected, from people long absent. The woman received one such message, a note from the child's guardian, written with kindness and curiosity. It did not accuse. It simply asked for truth. Her hands shook as she read, for she knew this was the moment when honesty would step beyond thought into action. That evening she sat at her table, pen in hand, and poured onto paper the words she had withheld for years. When she finished, tears wet the page, but they were not tears of fear. They were release. The man, too, found the past returning in subtle ways. A business venture he had once manipulated began to falter, exposing corners where he had not been fair. Instead of fighting the unraveling, he let it come. He returned what was owed, spoke truth where silence had profited him, and found that the very act of restitution lightened his spirit more than success ever had. He began to understand that consequence, when met with humility, becomes transformation. Beloved ones, this is the law of unfolding truth. Whatever has been shaped in darkness must meet the light in order to be completed. The meeting may sting, but it is the sting of cleansing, not of punishment. Grace does not erase consequence. It reorders it into learning. Each of the three discovered this. Pain turned to wisdom, fear turned to courage, shame turned to understanding. And the child, still distant, still unaware of the storm once spoken over their name, continued to live under quiet protection. The forces that guard innocence do not need to announce themselves. They simply keep watch, turning harm into distance, malice into misunderstanding that never reaches its target. Each time the woman or the man thought of the child, an unseen peace answered, reminding them that forgiveness was already moving toward them, even before they asked. One evening, near sunset, the relative visited the woman. They sat together by the window, speaking of ordinary things until the conversation turned, naturally, to that night of whispers. The woman trembled. "Do you think we will ever be free of it?" she asked. The relative smiled softly. "We are not meant to be free from it," she said. "We are meant to be free through it." At those words, the woman felt something within her loosen, the realization that redemption does not erase the past but transforms its weight into wisdom. Beloved, carry this understanding. Truth once faced becomes a companion, not a chain. It walks beside you to remind you of who you are and of who you may yet become. These three souls were beginning to learn that divine justice is not revenge but restoration. It returns every deed to its source, not to punish, but to complete the circle so that nothing is left unfinished. As days turned to weeks, their world grew quieter. The anxiety that had once filled their hearts became attentiveness. The guilt that had haunted them became empathy. Even their sleep deepened, for conscience at peace allows the body to rest. They did not speak often of the child now. The name had become too sacred to handle lightly. When it did rise in conversation, it was spoken with reverence, as one might speak a prayer. And so, beloved ones, the night of whispers had become a season of awakening. The ripples of truth spread outward, touching everything that needed healing. None of the three could have guessed that the story was far from over, for truth, once alive, continues its journey until justice is whole. My beloved ones, when truth has spoken, it does not vanish. It lingers in the air like fragrance after rain. Its purpose is not only to reveal but to rebuild. So the days that followed that sacred night unfolded as a gentle reconstruction of three human hearts. Nothing spectacular announced itself. Only the small, persistent rhythm of change that hums through an awakened life. The woman, who had once walked through the world guarded by fear, began to notice the music of ordinary things. Morning light on dishes, the sound of water running, a neighbor's laughter. All seemed to whisper that the world had not withdrawn from her. She realized that guilt had made her deaf to beauty, and forgiveness was teaching her to hear again. Each act of kindness she offered, to a stranger, to herself, became a brick in a new foundation. She did not yet call it redemption, but the walls of her heart were being rebuilt nonetheless. The man moved through his work with quieter hands. He no longer measured success by approval or profit but by integrity. When a colleague sought to exploit an oversight for advantage, he stopped it with calm words, surprising even himself. He did not feel proud, he felt aligned. For the first time in memory he slept deeply, without dreams of pursuit. Humility had opened a door where peace could enter and stay. The relative, whose fainting had become a story whispered in the family, carried herself with new steadiness. She spoke little of what she had experienced that night, but those who met her sensed an unshakable calm, as though she had seen something luminous and could never again forget its light. When quarrels arose among friends, she listened until tempers eased. When fear visited her at dusk, she breathed and remembered the hands of light that had once held her. Beloved, this is how transformation moves. Quiet as seed beneath soil, sure as dawn behind the horizon. The grand changes of spirit rarely begin with fanfare. They begin with small choices made faithfully. The courage to tell the truth, the decision to forgive, the willingness to remain kind when memory burns. Such choices are the architecture of a redeemed life. Yet the past, though forgiven, does not disappear. It becomes teacher. The woman often dreamed of the child whose name had shaken her soul. In the dreams she saw the child walking through sunlight, surrounded by calm, always turning once to smile before vanishing into brightness. Each dream left her lighter, as if the smile itself absolved her. She woke understanding that innocence does not accuse, it reminds. The man began writing letters he never sent. Apologies, reflections, blessings. He discovered that to put remorse into words was to transform it into purpose. Sometimes he read these letters aloud to the wind, believing that what is sincerely spoken never fails to find its listener. The relative continued tending her garden, watching seasons change, learning that every cycle of decay hid the promise of renewal. What fell into the soil fed what would bloom later. So it is with the human heart. Beloved ones, divine protection does not remove struggle. It accompanies it. The grace that surrounded the child now began to surround those who had once spoken in ignorance. Accidents were averted. Opportunities appeared at need. Friendships mended unexpectedly. These were not coincidences but the natural response of a universe that leans toward restoration when sincerity is offered. One evening, the three met again. They had not planned it. Life simply arranged it. The woman brought bread she had baked. The man brought fruit from his orchard. The relative brought flowers still wet with dew. They ate in the quiet companionship of people who have traveled through darkness and returned changed. Conversation drifted from weather to memory until the woman said softly, "I think the child was sent to teach us." No one disagreed. They understood now that the night of whispers had been a mirror showing them their own capacities. For harm, yes, but also for healing. When they parted, the woman stood at her doorway watching the man and the relative walk away down the lamplit road. Above them the moon rose, full and clear, like a seal upon the chapter just ending. She whispered a blessing into the cool air. May we never again forget the cost of silence, nor the mercy that follows confession. The words felt less like prayer and more like truth acknowledging itself. So, beloved, Transformation is not a single event. It is the art of living differently because truth has been seen. The three souls did not become saints. They became real. And reality, accepted and illumined, was holiness enough. My beloved ones, justice in its purest form is not a hammer. It is balance. It does not arrive to strike but to restore. When the echoes of that night faded into memory, the unseen order that governs all living things began to weave correction into the fabric of ordinary life. What had once been secret now sought alignment. What had been wounded began to mend. And so, beloved ones, the night of whispers had become a season of awakening. The ripples of truth spread outward, touching everything that needed healing. None of the three could have guessed that the story was far from over, for truth, once alive, continues its journey until justice is whole. My beloved ones, when truth has spoken, it does not vanish. It lingers in the air like fragrance after rain. Its purpose is not only to reveal but to rebuild. So the days that followed that sacred night unfolded as a gentle reconstruction of three human hearts. Nothing spectacular announced itself. Only the small, persistent rhythm of change that hums through an awakened life. The woman, who had once walked through the world guarded by fear, began to notice the music of ordinary things. Morning light on dishes, the sound of water running, a neighbor's laughter. All seemed to whisper that the world had not withdrawn from her. She realized that guilt had made her deaf to beauty, and forgiveness was teaching her to hear again. Each act of kindness she offered, to a stranger, to herself, became a brick in a new foundation. She did not yet call it redemption, but the walls of her heart were being rebuilt nonetheless. The man moved through his work with quieter hands. He no longer measured success by approval or profit but by integrity. When a colleague sought to exploit an oversight for advantage, he stopped it with calm words, surprising even himself. He did not feel proud, he felt aligned. For the first time in memory he slept deeply, without dreams of pursuit. Humility had opened a door where peace could enter and stay. Beloved ones, divine protection does not remove struggle. It accompanies it. The grace that surrounded the child now began to surround those who had once spoken in ignorance. Accidents were averted. Opportunities appeared at need. Friendships mended unexpectedly. These were not coincidences but the natural response of a universe that leans toward restoration when sincerity is offered. One evening the three met again. They had not planned it. Life simply arranged it. The woman brought bread she had baked. The man brought fruit from his orchard. The relative brought flowers still wet with dew. They ate in the quiet companionship of people who have traveled through darkness and returned changed. Conversation drifted from weather to memory until the woman said softly, "I think the child was sent to teach us." No one disagreed. They understood now that the night of whispers had been a mirror showing them their own capacities. For harm, yes, but also for healing. When they parted, the woman stood at her doorway watching the man and the relative walk away down the lamplit road. Above them the moon rose, full and clear, like a seal upon the chapter just ending. She whispered a blessing into the cool air. May we never again forget the cost of silence, nor the mercy that follows confession. The words felt less like prayer and more like truth acknowledging itself. So, beloved, transformation is not a single event. It is the art of living differently because truth has been seen. The three souls did not become saints. They became real. And reality, accepted and illumined, was holiness enough. My beloved ones, justice in its purest form is not a hammer. It is balance. It does not arrive to strike but to restore. When the echoes of that night faded into memory, the unseen order that governs all living things began to weave correction into the fabric of ordinary life. What had once been secret now sought alignment. What had been wounded began to mend. The relative, whose fainting had become a story whispered in the family, carried herself with new steadiness. She spoke little of what she had experienced that night, but those who met her sensed an unshakable calm, as though she had seen something luminous and could never again forget its light. When quarrels arose among friends, she listened until tempers eased. When fear visited her at dusk, she breathed and remembered the hands of light that had once held her. Beloved, this is how transformation moves. Quiet as seed beneath soil, sure as dawn behind the horizon. The grand changes of spirit rarely begin with fanfare. They begin with small choices made faithfully. The courage to tell the truth, the decision to forgive, the willingness to remain kind when memory burns. Such choices are the architecture of a redeemed life. Yet the past, though forgiven, does not disappear. It becomes teacher. The woman often dreamed of the child whose name had shaken her soul. In the dreams she saw the child walking through sunlight, surrounded by calm, always turning once to smile before vanishing into brightness. Each dream left her lighter, as if the smile itself absolved her. She woke understanding that innocence does not accuse, it reminds. The man began writing letters he never sent. Apologies, reflections, blessings. He discovered that to put remorse into words was to transform it into purpose. Sometimes he read these letters aloud to the wind, believing that what is sincerely spoken never fails to find its listener. The relative continued tending her garden, watching seasons change, learning that every cycle of decay hid the promise of renewal. What fell into the soil fed what would bloom later. So it is with the human heart. For the woman, justice came not as punishment but as invitation. She was offered work caring for children in the town's small schoolhouse. At first she hesitated. How could she, burdened by her own past, stand among such brightness? Yet the headmistress insisted, drawn by something she could not name. Within a week the woman found herself surrounded by laughter, the rustle of paper, the endless questions of growing minds. Every day she looked into faces that mirrored the innocence she had once feared to harm. Slowly, her guilt turned to guardianship. Teaching became atonement, and atonement, joy. The man's justice unfolded differently. A business partner, long ignored, confronted him over debts of honesty rather than coin. The conversation stung. He listened instead of defending himself. When he answered, his voice was calm. "You are right." He settled what was owed, offered more, and walked home lighter than he had left. The partners' astonishment rippled through their community. Rumors of the man's integrity replaced older tales of his ambition. Justice, in this case, had come wearing the face of respect regained. The relative received hers in understanding. She began writing her dreams in a small blue notebook, noticing patterns. The same river, the same child, the same bridge of sound. She realized that the dreams were not about the child alone, but about connection itself. The bridge was the path between ignorance and compassion. Sharing her journal with a small circle of neighbors, she found her words healing others' hidden shame. Each confession that followed in that circle became another thread in the quiet tapestry of renewal spreading outward from that single night. Beloved, divine justice works like that, silently, precisely, without spectacle. It arranges meetings, opens letters, stirs memory at exactly the right moment. It lets consequences bloom into insight. When accepted, it becomes grace. When resisted, it simply waits, patient as stone. One afternoon, while the woman cleaned her classroom, a young boy lingered behind. He held out a crumpled drawing, a child beneath a golden arch, smiling. "That's you," he said shyly. She laughed, touched. But when she looked again, she saw that the figure's eyes mirrored the same brightness she had dreamed months before. The light that had surrounded the child she once feared to remember. Her breath caught. It was as if forgiveness had drawn itself on paper through a child's hand. The man, walking home that same evening, paused by the riverbank. He noticed how the current carried fallen leaves without struggle. The water did not fight to keep them. It simply bore them onward. He understood that letting go was not loss but trust. He whispered into the dusk, "May what I release find peace." The wind answered with the scent of rain, and in that simple exchange he felt absolved. The relative dreamed once more of the shining bridge. This time she crossed it. On the other side waited not the child but her younger self, unafraid. They embraced. She woke laughing through tears, realizing that forgiveness is never one-sided. It travels backward through time, healing the versions of ourselves that could not yet understand. Beloved ones, consider this. Justice and mercy are not opposites. They are two wings of the same presence. One restores order, the other restores hope. Together they teach the soul to fly straighter. The three who had whispered in secrecy now moved through life as quiet instruments of that balance, unaware of how many unseen hearts their courage had already touched. In the stillness of their separate nights, they each felt the same subtle assurance. The story was not ending but widening. The child's destiny, untouched and radiant, continued to unfold elsewhere, its brightness spilling gently back toward them, proof that no act of truth, however painful, fails to serve the greater harmony. and so the unseen equilibrium held firm. Justice had been done not by decree but by transformation. The night of whispers had become the dawn of awareness, and its light stretched farther than any of them could see. My beloved ones, there comes a moment when the weight of truth, once spoken and faced, transforms into power. It is neither pride nor arrogance. It is clarity. The three souls, once trembling under the gravity of confession and consequence, began to sense this awakening. Their hearts, softened and purified, no longer recoiled from the weight of their own actions but rose with the strength of awareness. The woman, now seasoned in honesty and nurtured by the lessons of care and vigilance, moved through her days with intention. She saw her past missteps not as chains but as markers, lessons to honor, not repeat. The children she taught mirrored her own growth, and in guiding them, she guided herself. She realized that every tear shed in that room long ago had carried the seed of resilience. What once threatened to undo her life had become the foundation of a new, unshakable character. The man, humbled by his failures and embraced by the quiet rhythm of restored relationships, found a strength he had never known. Each choice he made in integrity now rippled outward, touching the lives of others who had doubted him. He understood that redemption is never spoken. It is lived. When his hands built, repaired, or held another in need, the echoes of the night of whispers followed him like a guardian, ensuring that every act was measured not by gain but by truth. Beloved ones, notice this truth. Victory is not always heralded by fanfare. Often it is quiet, almost imperceptible, yet it transforms everything it touches. The night that had begun with fear, trembling, and concealment now concluded with the rising of spirits that had learned to navigate the currents of truth, mercy, and justice. Each soul had been forged by the encounter and now carried its lessons outward like light spilling into dark corners. And the child, the luminous center of all these events, continued to live in purity and quiet power. Their name, once the cause of tension and fear, had become a symbol of protection, resilience, and divine order. The energy of that innocence had not been diminished by the fears or mistakes of others. It had instead activated the very forces that ensured destiny would remain unharmed. Each step taken by the child, though unseen by those who had once resisted, echoed back through the lives of the three, reinforcing lessons of humility, courage, and vigilance. It is vital to understand, beloved, that awakening and victory are rarely separated from trials. The tears, the confessions, the moments of weakness, and the silences that followed, they were not detours but essential threads in the tapestry of transformation. Every act of recognition, every choice to confront fear, every turn toward mercy, was a step toward the complete realization of spirit. Victory is simply the natural conclusion when lessons are learned and truth is embraced. One evening, all three found themselves under the same sky, though they did not speak of the night's events directly. They walked apart yet together, bound by the invisible threads of shared revelation. The moonlight fell evenly upon them, touching their faces with quiet reassurance. Each recognized the same invisible truth, that past mistakes, when met with honesty, mercy, and courage, transform into power that protects, elevates, and teaches. Beloved ones, let this teaching enter your hearts. Every trial faced with integrity, every fear met with courage, every truth confessed with sincerity, leads inexorably toward awakening. The child's destiny, untouched by deception, is proof of what can be accomplished when innocence and protection are preserved. And the lives that intersect with this innocence, through confession, consequence, or compassion, are gifted with the opportunity to rise as witnesses, messengers, and co-creators of light. As dawn approached, the three felt a quiet exhalation within themselves, a release of burdens once thought permanent. They had been tested by truth, guided by grace, and tempered by consequence. And now, victorious, they could move forward not as those who feared discovery, but as those who understood the sanctity of transparency, the power of vigilance, and the beauty of restoration. Beloved ones, take this to heart. The night of whispers is more than a memory. It is a pattern. Whenever hearts tremble under concealed truth, when guilt presses heavily upon conscience, when fear tempts flight, the same principles apply. Face the truth. Embrace mercy. Act with courage. Witness the unfolding of justice. And in doing so, victory will not be a distant dream but a living reality, luminous and sustaining. My beloved ones, when a night of revelation has passed, the work of awareness continues quietly. Life begins to speak in subtle ways, leaving messages like footprints across the heart, reminders of what has been learned and of what must not be forgotten. The three souls, each transformed by the events of that sacred evening, began to notice these signs, soft, persistent, and unmistakably meaningful. The woman found herself attuned to small omens that had once gone unnoticed. A single bird perched at her window could shift her mood. A passing word in conversation could illuminate a choice she had not yet seen. A pattern in her daily routine could reveal the hidden currents of her own intention. She realized that the universe is never silent. It speaks in the spaces between thoughts, in the rhythms of nature, and in the quiet inclinations of conscience. Beloved ones, the lesson is clear. Nothing is accidental. Every sign, every whisper of intuition is a guidepost for the soul. The man, now tempered by humility, began to recognize his own instincts as divine guidance. A lingering unease, a hesitation to speak, a sudden clarity. These were no longer annoyances or doubts to be dismissed. They were signals, spiritual nudges that indicated which actions would maintain integrity and which might lead to harm. When he ignored them, he felt the consequences. When he honored them, he experienced an unspoken harmony that touched not only him but those around him. Faith, he discovered, is strengthened not only by miracles but by careful attention to these subtle currents. The relative, carrying the wisdom of her fainting and dreams, became sensitive to patterns in the world. She noticed recurring symbols, words, and events, each hinting at something greater than the immediate moment. Even ordinary interactions, a smile, a pause, a gesture, began to resonate with meaning. She understood that divine messages often arrive quietly, in ways that seem mundane but are imbued with purpose. To perceive them requires patience, discernment, and trust. Beloved ones, let this teaching enter your hearts. Every trial faced with integrity, every fear met with courage, every truth confessed with sincerity, leads inexorably toward awakening. The child's destiny, untouched by deception, is proof of what can be accomplished when innocence and protection are preserved. And the lives that intersect with this innocence, through confession, consequence, or compassion, are gifted with the opportunity to rise as witnesses, messengers, and co-creators of light. As dawn approached, the three felt a quiet exhalation within themselves, a release of burdens once thought permanent. They had been tested by truth, guided by grace, and tempered by consequence. And now, victorious, they could move forward not as those who feared discovery, but as those who understood the sanctity of transparency, the power of vigilance, and the beauty of restoration. Beloved ones, take this to heart. The night of whispers is more than a memory. It is a pattern. Whenever hearts tremble under concealed truth, when guilt presses heavily upon conscience, when fear tempts flight, the same principles apply. Face the truth. Embrace mercy. Act with courage. Witness the unfolding of justice. And in doing so, victory will not be a distant dream but a living reality, luminous and sustaining. My beloved ones, when a night of revelation has passed, the work of awareness continues quietly. Life begins to speak in subtle ways, leaving messages like footprints across the heart, reminders of what has been learned and of what must not be forgotten. The three souls, each transformed by the events of that sacred evening, began to notice these signs, soft, persistent, and unmistakably meaningful. My beloved ones, take heed. The universe communicates constantly, though often in hushed tones. A sense of unease, a sudden clarity, a coincidence that tugs at your attention. These are not accidents. They are invitations to reflect, to discern, and to act in alignment with truth. By cultivating faith and attentiveness, the hearts of those willing to listen are shielded from deception and guided toward purpose. The three found that as they followed these whispers, life itself began to flow more smoothly. Challenges became manageable, conflicts resolved more gracefully, and opportunities arrived in ways they could not have anticipated. Each small acknowledgement of a sign strengthened their intuition, fortifying them against negativity and enhancing their capacity to protect, nurture, and guide others in turn. Beloved ones, understand this well. Divine messages are a constant presence. They appear in actions, words, and patterns. They are rarely loud, but they are always clear to those who watch, listen, and trust. In recognizing and honoring these messages, the three continued their journey, walking each step with vigilance, discernment, and unwavering faith in the goodness that surrounds them. My beloved ones, faith without action is like a flame without air. It may flicker but cannot fully shine. The three souls, awakened by the night of whispers and guided by subtle signs, now faced the crucial test. Whether their understanding would remain passive or transform into purposeful deeds. True faith, beloved, always calls for movement, the courage to align thought, intention, and action with what is just, compassionate, and true. The woman discovered this in the quiet moments of her teaching. Every child entrusted to her care was not simply a pupil but a living symbol of vigilance, of innocence requiring protection. She found that her actions mattered profoundly. Patience with frustration, encouragement for timid hearts, attentiveness to the smallest need. Faith gave her awareness. Action transformed that awareness into a living shield. Each choice she made became a declaration that she would not allow harm, physical, emotional, or spiritual, to pass unchecked. The man, humbled by prior mistakes, recognized that courage was now demanded of him. When challenges arose in his work, he could no longer hide behind silence or avoidance. He took responsibility openly, acted with integrity, and spoke truth even when it was uncomfortable. Every step he took in honesty strengthened his faith, and every act of courage reinforced the divine protection that had been guiding him all along. Beloved ones, this is how alignment with truth manifests. Not in grand gestures, but in consistent, deliberate actions that reflect the values of conscience and compassion. The relative, whose awareness had been sharpened through dreams and intuition, began to counsel and guide others quietly. She observed when someone hesitated, when fear lingered in a friend or neighbor, and offered gentle reminders of courage and discernment. Her faith became active by sustaining the spiritual growth of others. In her calm, steadfast presence, she demonstrated that action is not always visible to the world, but its impact reaches far beyond what we perceive. Beloved, understand this well. Faith is strengthened when paired with vigilance, courage, and decisiveness. The lessons of the Night of Whispers taught that protection is not passive. It is cultivated through awareness and deliberate action. When the three responded to the signs, acted with clarity, and upheld what was just, they reinforced a protective current around themselves and the innocent, ensuring that negativity could not take root. The child, silent yet radiant, continued to serve as a symbol of divine order and resilience. Every action by the three, every act of courage, every word spoken in honesty, every moment of protection, reinforced the harmony surrounding the child. This is a lesson, beloved ones. When faith is made manifest in action, it multiplies protection, guidance, and divine blessing. Even the smallest gesture, undertaken with integrity and courage, becomes part of a larger, unseen orchestration of good. There were moments of challenge, as always. Doubts arose, temptations whispered, and fear threatened to retreat into old patterns. Yet faith reminded them that protection was assured not by avoidance but by steadfastness. The woman taught herself to act even when fear whispered. The man spoke truth even when silence seemed safer. The relative guided others even when her own heart trembled. In these choices, the invisible forces of justice and mercy moved freely, responding to courage with alignment and blessing. Beloved ones, the path of action guided by faith is not always easy. It requires attentiveness to subtle signs, willingness to confront what is uncomfortable, and the courage to act even when results are unseen. Yet these very acts fortify the soul, align it with divine protection, and create a sanctuary around innocence and goodness. Through action, faith moves from idea to reality, shaping life into a reflection of divine order. And so, as the three continued to live with discernment and vigilance, their lives became a tapestry of faithful action. Every choice reinforced the lessons of that night of whispers. Honesty, courage, protection, and alignment with truth. Each step taken in faith strengthened the bonds of spiritual resilience, not only for themselves but for all who came into contact with their lives. Beloved, remember this teaching. Knowledge without application remains dormant. Faith that is unwilling to act cannot fulfill its purpose. Courage, discernment, and attentiveness transform understanding into protection. And protection, rooted in action and guided by divine grace, ensures that both innocence and those who honor it can flourish in the face of negativity. My beloved ones, now we arrive at the culmination of this journey, the point where understanding, courage, and faith converge into a serene awareness that all is not only unfolding but being guided with divine precision. The three souls, once trembling under the weight of secrecy, guilt, and fear, now stand as witnesses to the power of truth, vigilance, and mercy. Their lives, forever altered by the night of whispers, serve as living testimony to the enduring presence of protection and grace. The woman, having embraced the lessons of honesty and action, walks through her days with confidence that is neither arrogant nor brittle. She knows that her past will not define her, but her choices will. Every child she nurtures, every kindness she offers, every moment she acts in alignment with integrity becomes a shield, not just for herself, but for the fragile innocence that surrounds her. Beloved ones, remember, awareness and proactive goodness create a fortress stronger than fear, more enduring than any defense built of avoidance or avoidance alone. The man, tempered by humility and guided by discernment, carries a quiet strength that radiates through all he touches. His words are measured, his actions intentional, and his heart open. He has learned that courage is the companion of faith, and integrity the companion of love. Each step he takes strengthens not only his own path, but the lives of those who cross it. Through him, we see that protection and blessing are not abstract concepts. They are the natural consequence of living in alignment with truth and courage. The relative, whose awareness has grown through intuition and reflection, embodies the grace of attentive presence. She listens, observes, and guides, offering strength where it is needed and patience where it is demanded. Her life is a testament to the quiet power of vigilance, the ability to perceive subtle signs, to honor them, and to act with care. In this, she teaches a profound lesson. Divine protection is not only a shield but a current, moving through those who choose to see, to hear, and to act with fidelity. Beloved ones, hear this well. You are never truly alone. Even when fear rises, even when deception seems near, there is a presence that surrounds you, an invisible force that attends to the paths of the righteous. The child at the center of that night of whispers remains a symbol, a living reminder that innocence and integrity are never forsaken. Divine protection moves through all things, unseen yet unwavering, responding to courage, to awareness, and to faith. Take comfort, for vigilance, discernment, and action create a harmony that cannot be broken. The three souls serve as a guide for all who encounter challenges, reminding us that the consequences of truth, when faced with courage, become blessings. Their transformation is not miraculous in the sense of spectacle, but miraculous in its demonstration of what any soul can achieve when it chooses awareness over denial, action over hesitation, and faith over despair. Beloved ones, let this final teaching settle in your hearts. Your awareness is your armor. Your discernment is your compass. Your courage is your shield. And your faith, when coupled with action, is the light that illuminates even the darkest path. Trust in the signs, honor the lessons, and know that protection follows those who live with integrity, care, and love. As you step forward in your own lives, remember the night of whispers and the transformation it brought. Recall the woman's tears and her awakening, the man's humility and renewed purpose, the relative's insight and calm presence. They show that every trial, every hidden truth, every moment of uncertainty carries within it the seed of awakening. And when that seed blooms, it brings not only justice and healing but victory. Quiet, steadfast, and enduring. My beloved ones, the journey continues, yet you are never alone. Let your heart remain vigilant, your spirit courageous, and your faith unwavering. Divine protection is yours, not as a promise of absence of challenge, but as a presence that sustains, guides, and restores. Walk forward, and know that every act of honesty, compassion, and courage builds a life illuminated by grace. Thus, the night of whispers concludes, yet its lessons echo through eternity. Trust in truth, act with courage, and remain vigilant, for divine forces move always with those who honor their light. You are chosen, you are protected, and you are empowered to live fully, faithfully, and fearlessly.